All right, we've got folks coming in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from, and welcome to our live webinar. We're going to give a couple of minutes to allow folks to come in, but wanted to just say welcome. It's a beautiful fall day here in Connecticut. I'm looking outside at some beautiful orange leaves. We don't see a lot of that in California. I'm sure Jeremy's seeing the beach and the ocean, so we're joining you from coast to coast, but it's grateful to have you here with us. We are going to have an extremely interesting webinar today. But first of all, for those that you don't know me, my name is Brant Handley. I'm the founder and managing director of Resource Options International, and we do retained executive search specifically for the middle market. And come in now, would love for you to just say hello. I'm looking across at my screen here. Want to make sure that you can hear my voice. So just give me a quick hello. How are you? I'm here. Be able to see that you're with us. So please sign in as you come in. And it'd be great to have everyone do so as we get ready to get launched here. So welcome once again. For those that you don't know me, my name is Brant Handley, Managing Director of Resource Options International, and grateful to have you all join us here from all over the world. I've got Bill coming in. Hey, yo, how are you, Bill? Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, great. Rainier, I see Diane there. Wonderful. Great, thank you. Got everybody signing in as we go. And we're going to let a few more folks come on board before we get started here. So once again, we've got a very, very exciting webinar. Dr. Jeremy Lurey, a gentleman I've known for about a year now. I think that's right, Jeremy. We met through a networking organization in Southern California that we're both very active in. And I've been extremely impressed with the type of work and client work specifically that Jeremy has done across all kinds of companies, small to middle market up to the Fortune 100. Jeremy has a master's as well as a PhD in organizational psychology, has worked for both Anderson as well as Pricewaterhouse Consulting earlier in his career, and has been on his own for about 15 years, if I'm not mistaken. Jeremy can correct me on his bio when he comes up, but he is an incredible leader as it relates to coaching, has worked on succession plans, has done in-depth work with a number of companies in terms of developing next generation leaders. For those of you that are joining us that are family business owners, he's done a lot of work in that area, and I think you'll find his presentation to be extremely interesting and I think quite useful. We've got Mark coming in. Hello from Maggie in California. Good morning, y'all. Great to have you here. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes as the balance of the folks join us. So Jeremy, or Dr. Lurey, but I think he prefers to be called Jeremy, is going to take the stage in a couple of moments and walk you through a presentation. It'll be probably about 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 25 at the tops, depending on the level of detail we get into with it. And then, of course, we'll session as we always do, 15, 20 minutes or so of that. But please stick around to the end. We've got an offer for you from both Exec Coach, that Jeremy is the founder and exec managing partner for, as well as ROI. And you'll want to stay to the very end and make sure that you get an opportunity to hear about that offer. So just about ready to get started. Good morning, Stephen, to you. Thank you. Those of you that haven't signed in and said hello, please send us a quick note so that you know you can hear our voice, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes when we hit the 5-minute mark here. So once again, joining me in a couple, Jeremy Lurey. Dr. Jeremy Lurey is the founding and managing partner of a couple of different businesses, plus Delta Consulting, but also of a chief exec coach, and he'll be telling you a little bit about that, but more importantly, diving into the importance of succession planning, as well as generating those next generation leaders. Something that is extremely important in middle market companies. And for all of you that have worked in large and small organizations, having that bench ready is clearly an area that's extremely important in terms of the longevity of the business. So I think we're just coming up on the 5-minute mark, Jeremy. If you're ready to go, I'll go on mute and turn it over to you, and then join you back in at the Q&A section. So Jeremy, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate that. Let me know, anybody, just use your chat panel, or Brent, let me know if we're having problems with my audio. Otherwise, hopefully everybody will see the PowerPoint coming up. We'll be able to hear my voice as well. As Brent said, my name's Jeremy Lurey. I am the founder and CEO of Chief Exec Coach, which is a secondary firm I started over this last year, having spent several years in the succession planning space. My background, as Brent mentioned, I've worked with everything ranging from a $5 million family business to Fortune 100 companies, managing change and helping leaders identify where they're going, kind of how to get to the next level, and then put the plans in place to get there. Over the last several years, I have focused more and more of my energy around advising small to mid-sized business owners, helping them set their strategic direction, and then, of course, manage their succession when that transition is coming up. It's an absolute privilege to be with you all today. I appreciate the invitation to speak with everybody, Brent, and look forward to sharing some information with you over this next half hour or so before we get into some Q&A. So we had asked you all several questions when you registered for the session. The first one was, if the owner or other senior executive of your organization were to leave, is there a solid, well-developed backfill ready to go within the organization? And 12 of you responded yes. So about a third of the overall registrants said, yeah, that they actually have a succession plan in place. 21 folks who responded, so a little over half, 57%, said no. So we hope that you all are with us today. I'm definitely going to go through some information around how to build out that succession plan, how to support your next generation leaders. For those of you who did say yes, you do have a succession plan in place, about 20% said it's just a gut feeling. We think it's there. About another 20% said it is a clear succession plan, so it must have been documented now. They said they're using other methods to monitor it and manage the process. When we asked a question about which generation are you in, just trying to get a sense of who's going to be participating with us today. We had one generation person with us. That's somebody born before 1946 who's still active and working. We had more than half of you were baby boomers. About a third Gen Xers and a few millennials joined us too. We asked you a question around what your wants and needs were. So what specific areas do you want to cover? And a lot of great questions came in, talking about how to identify a successor, how to develop those next generation leaders. Some special scenarios were offered around how to sell my business, how to identify somebody who might want to purchase it. Or someone even had asked, how do we plan for the disaster, the worst case scenario? Well, we hope that nobody will ever get here, knock on wood, whatever you're next to, that if something catastrophic were to happen, having put a succession plan in place today to address that. So we're going to go through some foundational information that covers most of those topics around leadership development and generational differences. We're going to talk about a sample business succession plan and give you all a chance to sort of see a roadmap of how you might cover 12, 18 months or more of a succession planning process. And then I'm going to wrap up with a few things around family business. So for anybody in particular who's working in a family business, I'll share a few highlights there before we run out of time today. As you're seeing in your chat panels right now, please do feel free to send in more questions. We'll be happy to address them throughout. I'll do the best I can to tailor this to your particular needs to make sure you get the most. Okay. I went out of order a bit, but we already covered that one. So let's jump right in. About the generational differences, and I'm sure many of you have seen materials about this. You're living these generations. I don't want to stereotype anybody, but just to give you a sense of it. First, come from a generation of work, professional identity matters, really trying to strive for financial stability, providing for their families in general. We're in a place now where most boomers who are born in the 1946 to 1964 kind of time frame, these folks are still at work and are going to work well into their 70s. Some of that's because of the recession. Maybe they lost some financial abilities. A lot of this is because they've started their own businesses and they're passionate about what they do and they're not ready to let go. So when we talk about succession plans, it's important to pay attention to the boomers and their traits and what their wants and desires are in the future. This next slide here about Gen X. So the next generation who is, standing ready in many cases to take over, at least emotionally and psychologically ready, they don't necessarily have the same skill sets. They weren't necessarily the founders of many of your mid-market companies. And so it's important to look at what are their motivations. And as you see, often Gen Xers are focused more on work-life balance, kind of doing their own thing as entrepreneurs or solopreneurs. They're not necessarily sticking around in companies. This next slide, you'll see the difference. It's not just Gen Xers, this is for millennials and next gen in general. The boomer model was very much an up and out. Climb the corporate ladder, get the title, make the money, provide for your family, and really define yourself significantly through your professional identity and sort of what your professional accomplishments are. The next generation, not as much. Oftentimes it's a move up, a move to the left or right. I've had people refer to this as the climbing wall, right? You don't always just scale straight up the mountain. Sometimes you move left and right. So lateral move from a corporate office into a regional office, moving from that regional office back to corporate. Many of you who run mid-market companies, right? So a lot of the Gen Xers and especially millennials, far more passionate about working directly with the business owner or in a smaller environment, whether it's 5 to 50 million in revenue or 100 to 500 employees or even a little bit bigger, but not necessarily working at places like I used to at Anderson and PricewaterhouseCoopers, but working for smaller operations where they can contribute more. That brings the entrepreneurial spirit forward so that they really can make a difference in those companies. So I share this with you, again, not to type anybody, but just to give you some perspective that what used to work for boomers, that up and out, my father, quite frankly, is the epitome of a boomer. He worked at Latham & Watkins, which is one of the world's largest law firms. He was the last one as an attorney to ever work with the two founding partners, Latham or Watkins. He was literally #1 in seniority when he finally retired after 43 or 44 years. As I said, I worked at Anderson and PricewaterhouseCoopers, two of the largest consulting firms in the world. I left them both after about 2 years, 2.5 years each. I'm a Gen X. I wanted to do my own thing. I had more of an entrepreneurial spirit. I was not going to stay in big firm for my whole career as my father did. So just, think about that personal story. I wouldn't say that we are the essence of everybody in your organization, but we're at a very unique time now with 4 generations in the workforce, from the traditionalists, the great generation, through the boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and different people, different motivations for goals in life. So I'll share this slide with you, the 9-box model. Anybody who has a background in human resources may have seen this before. Many of you, this may be brand new. It's a way of looking at our high potential leaders. Who do we have within our ranks that we see as the potential to really contribute to our organizations in the future? Okay, so let me just walk through this with you briefly. And this comes from larger corporate settings typically. We bring it into the small business and middle market environment, but really this is sort of my corporate background, corporate consulting background, sharing with you. So the top axis moving across, you see leadership potential. And on the bottom, some descriptions of, is the person in a role that is probably the highest level role this person will ever get to? Or is this person in a role that maybe they can jump forward 1 level or more than 1 level? That's the potential. Coming up the left-hand side, vertically, you see it says performance. So are they currently meeting expectations? Are they exceeding expectations on that outstanding? Obviously, we'd all love to have rising stars and stars in our ranks. We don't necessarily with everybody. And so it's okay to have people in that very left column, who are solid performers, they're the reliable, steady eddies, but you just know they're going to be individual contributors. They're going to be very sort of tactically, functionally focused for their careers. We need those supporters on our team. but you're probably not going to look at them as your successors to take over your business. You're probably not going to invest a lot of leadership dollars in them or hire a coach like me to work with them. Instead, you're going to look at the folks in the middle, your top talent, and say, you know what, these folks really could contribute. These folks have the potential of jumping up the next level. We want to send them to a conference. We want to give them some additional management training. We want to bring in an executive coach like Jeremy to help polish up their skills. And then the folks who you see in the right column, your stars and your rising stars, those are the ones who potentially could be your successors to take over your business. Someone asked about regional leadership. So this isn't all about the CEO transition. This could be a general manager in a regional practice. This could be a senior vice president in one of the business units. So this is not all about CEO transition, the business owner. But those stars and those rising stars are the ones who are showing the potential to really make multiple jumps and contribute in a different way. I was leading a discussion during a CFO roundtable last week, and someone asked a great question around the derailing box in the bottom right. Derailers aren't necessarily bad people. I don't want to advocate for firing a derailer. My best example of this was that I had a family business client we were working with. Father had started the business. He was a baby boomer. His older son was employee number one, came on board about 6 months after they started. And about 10 years later, they were running probably a $6 or $8 million consulting practice with national presence, very well respected in their field. The younger son had been on board for a while, and he was a total derailer. He had no interest in what the kind of main business was doing, but he saw the potential to do some things very differently for their clients. And lo and behold, this young kid who would have been labeled as the outlier or sort of the renegade, they launched a secondary business using funds from the primary business. That derailer ended up growing a $25 to $30 million business. And the succession planning that went on was they sold to private equity and got far more than they ever would have for that main consulting business. So derailers are not necessarily bad people. We want to look at, are they innovative? Can they contribute somewhere else? Do we want to give them some seed money to go do something? So just, be really careful about assuming your derailers should be fired just because they're not, towing the corporate line. There may be some additional value that they can offer. Okay. One more quick slide around next gen and motivations, and we come back to a few questions you all are asking right now, which is great. But this is another way of looking at potential. I have a colleague in DC who sort of coined this term passiontivity, where passion and productivity meet. I'll bring up the quadrants here. You can see a different way of looking at that 9 box. Low left, low motivation, low skill. You're not going to want to invest a lot of energy in them. You may potentially want to terminate them or help them transition out through some outplacement counseling and such. It just isn't working, and they're not necessarily going to contribute to your future. Upper left, though, highly motivated people who don't have the technical skills right now. So a little bit of, on-the-job training could help them. A conference or an executive coach could help some of those people really get on track and contribute. Again, I talked about the derailers before. So lower right, low motivation, high skill, they're disengaged. I'd ask why. Maybe it's that they don't like their boss. Maybe it's that they're in a bad job for their skill sets, and we should get them out of operations, put them in sales, for example. Just sharing one possibility. And then ultimately your high engagement in the upper right, you're highly motivated, highly skilled. Those are the folks you're probably going to look at for your succession planning. Bring in executive coaches, put them through some executive leadership programs, whether it's a Harvard executive MBA or some classes in your local community college, but just something to give them the leadership skills to really contribute. And we want to ask the questions, unlike in a boomer model of, hey, we have a promotion for you, are you ready? The questions that the Gen Xers are going to want to hear, and especially the millennials, are the who, what, when, where, why, how. And obviously how much, right? But really, what is your passion? What are your life goals? And what are you looking for? Do you want to job rotate into Ohio from our corporate office in California to get some other experience? When do you want to do that? And how much do you want to travel? And so there are other interests, other motivations we may want to consider with this that don't necessarily come up from our passive boomers where there's a promotion opportunity and they would jump on it right away. Okay. I want to look at just a couple of these questions that are coming up. So getting a successor on track to lead the company without overcommitting them. John, it's a great question. And let me bring up our next slide now as we jump into the actual succession plan roadmap I would share with you all. You'll see I have about an 18-month process here that I typically walk through with clients. I call that my insurance policy. Do you need 18 months? No. I had a client once. He was well into his 60s, probably 66, 67 by the time I got the first call. He said, Jeremy, I started this company 30 years ago. I want to be done in 3 months. Now, you can all imagine, 3 months is a very short time frame for someone who's been doing this for 30 years. So we talked a little bit, and what he meant was in 3 months, they were celebrating the 30-year anniversary of the organization. And so he wanted to be able to announce that he was transitioning out. And so we actually had about a 9 or 12-month period looking for his successor, making sure we groomed that person after selecting him. In this case, it was a him. Having that former CEO in that sort of support role, ambassador, mentor role for another few months before we transitioned. That final purchase box, which could take months and years. I've worked with some companies, for example, some aerial applicators. So basically people who do crop dusting, but they do a lot of other things like fight forest fires and brush fires and such. So in that aerial application business, you can imagine they own airfields, they own airplanes. These are very asset-rich companies. A younger generation person who's mid-career coming in probably won't be able to afford a $10 million buyout on day one. So the final purchase can take many years. Someone had just asked about the equity transfer and such. I'm going to focus a little bit on the leadership transition right now. And then as we move into wrap up, I'll get back to some of these questions around the sale and that transfer of ownership, not just the transfer of responsibilities. So let's focus on these first 4 boxes. Initial planning is committing to doing something around a succession plan, identifying that it's time. The leadership coaching is typically about identifying 1 or 2 or 3 people you want to make that investment in. If we go back to that 9-box model, it may be your top 10 leadership roles you want to have backfills for, just in case they were to leave the company or some life event were to happen. And that leadership coaching is all about helping people be better leaders. Look at some of what goes into that process. It's assessing their current capabilities, understanding their vision for the future, and giving them a chance to sort of share that with whatever leadership body may exist. You may have a transition committee you put together. You may have a board that you're working with. And those advisors would want to know, if Brant is my identified successor, what's Brant's vision for the future and how is he going to take the baton as I hand off and step out. In that transition, there are 2 key pieces here. Knowledge transfers. Clearly, I've got to share all of my institutional knowledge with Brant, using him as my example. Customer relationships, bankers, accountants, attorneys, anything that's gone on in our 10, 20, 30 years as an organization. The day I walk away, if that's in my head, the company has a real problem, and I don't secure my legacy or create a sustainable future for anybody. So I want to share that knowledge with others. The relationship delivery is a term that one of my clients coined, which is to say, if there's a key relationship like a banker or an attorney or a different advisor, if there potentially is a relationship with a key customer, and not just the account manager on the client side, but the owner of that company. I literally want to make all those introductions for my successor. I want to hand over those relationships just like I would a document with institutional knowledge. And over time, we slowly start transferring management responsibilities one after another, whether it's signing the checks or signing the contracts with our customers, whatever it may be. As long as I'm responsible for doing something, I can't leave. As soon as I hand that over to somebody else, I basically work myself out of a job. And as you go through this, be mindful of your leaders who are in transition. This is an emotional process for people who are retiring. It can be very emotionally charged and tense. for people who aren't sure what their next lily pad is that they're jumping to. So remember, you want your leaders to go from being direct supervisors to being mentors. You want them to go from being decision makers to being advocates of their successors. And so you'll really want to think about some coaching for them as well. I had one client several years ago, first sit down with him, and he was the president CEO, had been in the role for 30 years or so. He was looking at his VP of operations to take over for him. And he said to me, Jeremy, you know, I'm sure you're a pretty good coach, but I think I'm a pretty good CEO, and I don't think I need a coach to be a good CEO. So you can imagine I gulped. That very silent 30 seconds felt like my entire lifetime flashed before my eyes. And then what this person said to me next was brilliant. He said, you know what, Jeremy, I've never been a CEO in transition. I want to support my VP successor. I want him to be successful, but I don't want to look like a lame duck. So help me become a great leader in transition. And here's some of the tools that I shared with him to transition him out of being an active decision maker, being a good leadership developer. And some of you may have seen some of these things before. So SMART goals, very specific and measurable goals that are set to a specific time. So for example, you want your successor to manage the entire year-end audit and closing process. That would be a specific goal that you may not want to leave your companies to somebody until that person has been through that whole process. Or you want this person to engage with your key customer and negotiate the whole contract, sign the deal. Those are very specific, measurable tasks you'd want your successor to be capable of performing when you move on. And again, you can relate to this as the CEO and business owner. You can relate to this as the SVP of sales, the chief revenue officer. You could be the chief engineer. All of these tactics are appropriate regardless of that title and position you hold. One-on-one meetings is a chance for people to have a safe conversation about what's going on, what's working, what's not. What are your successor's goals for the next 30, 60, 90 days? What can I do to support you? Where are you falling short? And the bottom here, Ken Blanchard, for anyone who's read 1 Minute Manager. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. I truly believe feedback is a gift. And this time for succession is a very unique, as I said, very emotionally charged journey. So we want to make sure to give our internal candidates as much support as we can. Otherwise, the roadmap into a box that's not even on the screen, which is called the search. And where you don't have that internal candidate, you're not providing the coaching and the transition planning, which typically includes an interim promotion. I could go from VP to president while you stay CEO. I could go from senior director of finance to VP of finance before my CFO transitions out. So several steps in here in that 7 to 12 month range before we ultimately get to the transition and I get that CEO promotion as the successor, or I get that chief revenue officer promotion, whatever the case may be. Again, final purchase being something that's going to happen downstream. One thing to keep in mind, I mentioned before with our generational differences, we're typically stuck around. Now, some of you may be boomers and you left your big companies to start your own organizations. That's great. Remember, I mentioned the story about my dad, 44 years with one law firm. So the next generation, the Gen Xers and especially millennials, they're not hanging out in the same way boomers did. There's some research came out a few years ago. Typical boomer path would be staying with the company for at least 5 to 10 years, if not an entire career. That employee loyalty and corporate loyalty back to employees has disappeared years ago. Gen Xers typically stay in companies for 2 to 3 years. 5 is really an outside boundary for most Gen Xers. Millennials, we're down to 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 months if it's a good environment. So I'll share a little bit of this with you. Make sure that when you have high potential leaders in your ranks, you do what you can to motivate them and entice them to stay. Otherwise, they turn into what a colleague of mine calls popos, passed over and pissed off. And these are not the folks who are going to hang out for 44 years if they're being passed over and they're getting pissed off about it. So it's really important to provide the leadership development, provide the training, provide the job opportunities, and ultimately personalize But it's a very personal process. So how do we do that? I make it very safe for the successor candidates to ask the question. And they can't come forward and say, hey, John, you look like you're getting old and are ready to quit. That clearly is not going to go over very well. But a different way of asking the question would be, hey, John, I'm really committed to our company's success. I see a real future for myself here and for the company. Can we talk about it? Or, hey, John, I've been here for 10 years now. I think there's a lot more I could contribute over the next several years. Can we talk about my career path and what you see as possible for me? Right, so very different ways of engaging the conversation proactively and what some might think is prematurely, because that then creates the opportunity for special projects, task force assignments, other kinds of things that give me, that internal candidate, the opportunity to demonstrate my real potential. For better or worse, most of us do role appropriate work. I'm going to act like a VP, not like a CEO, so my CEO won't think that I've got the chops to do it. Well, give them permission to step up and shine. More often than not, they will. Starting to move towards the backside of succession, I want to just highlight some of the post-transition. Clearly, as the owner steps out of an active role, you need to consider what his or her continuing role might be. It could be ownership until you transfer all the equity through an ESOP, or transfer all assets through a purchase. It's possible that that person wants to remain on the board as a chairman or chairperson of the board. But we're going to have some level of reorganization as that leader moves on. That creates opportunities for other staff to step up. As one person moves up, the whole behind. And so it's important to start talking to your staff about their wants and desires for their careers. Start fitting in the puzzle pieces differently, because again, this is not about a succession of one. This is about the whole organization and realigning everybody to perform in that new environment once that leader steps away. Final thoughts here on best practices that I've learned over the years working with several different clients, and then I'll share just something briefly about family business. Please start the process earlier than you think. I know you might be participating today saying, you know, I'm not even 60 years old yet. Why do I need to listen to this? Or, you know, I'm 65, but I'm going to work another 10 years. Just be prepared. You may lose your next generation talent if you don't start raising this conversation early enough. Unfortunately, life events do happen. And I've learned the longer you wait, the more options disappear during that time frame. So we want you to be healthy enough and well to choose which options are the right ones for you. And if it's developing that next generation leader, get him or her engaged early on. Okay, get your staff involved. Start talking to customers early in the process than you might think. You know, that if you've identified, again, I'll go back to Brant. Brant is my successor. I want to introduce him to my customers before I just disappear. Right? I had one client, they didn't do anything to speak with their customers, and then the emails just started bouncing. Jeremy is no longer with our company, or Jeremy has moved on to retirement. That's the wrong way to approach this. So be proactive and start earlier. Last bullet point I'll just highlight here, the transition timeout. I mentioned the one-on-ones before. It's important for people to feel safe about having a conversation. Oftentimes people don't like change. They resist change in a variety of different ways, not always productive ones. So the transition timeout is my way of giving people permission to just hit the stop button and pause and ask the question. I had one succession process I was leading, and the, I'll call him former president CEO, was stepping out, and we were building up his successor. Well, his successor would make a decision. And just to use a simple example, they put on events for their customers annually, big conventions. Well, the successor would choose the salmon fillet for the dinner. And the former CEO would come back from his travels because he was being an ambassador overseas, he was doing some other business, and he would literally veto that salmon and say, we always get the rubber chicken, or whatever the case may be. And now, if there's a reason for that, we had somebody who was allergic to fish once, and our biggest customer ended up never coming back. Okay, well, that's good information to know. But otherwise, let's just let that decision go. the transition timeout gives staff, especially, as well as that successor, permission to just say, timeout. I'm not sure who we're listening to here in this dual leadership environment, which decision matters, or is there a reason why you're overruling me when I thought that I was empowered to make decisions like this? So it can be really helpful for people to take that time out in situations where there's some conflict or some confusion about who do we listen to or what's our next step forward. I know we're in family businesses. I've become very passionate about family businesses the last several years, having worked with many of them. There is nothing more tragic than seeing a family that can't act like a family because the business is getting away. Imagine going to your Thanksgiving turkey dinners and you don't want to talk to anybody there because they're all in your business and you can't stand what's going on during the workday. So you don't want to see them around the family table. And I've had the good fortune of working with several families to help let brothers be brothers again, let uncles be good uncles and nephews and the whole thing. So I would just offer a few different scenarios here. And the interesting research is that when we talk to family business owners, nearly all of them believe our business is going to succeed from our first to our second generation, second to third, third to fourth. That they truly believe that in 5 years from now, 9 out of 10 of these family business owners, of course, will still be here. Statistics are alarming. Not even a third of the family businesses in America will make it to our second gen. And it drops off dramatically. Only about 12% get to second. Only about 3% get down to the next level into a fourth generation and beyond. And so if you have a child in your organization, don't assume that that next gen leader, that Gen X or millennial wants to take over. That person may be in your business because he or she feels an obligation to you, the parent, but that doesn't mean that they want to keep doing this. If you have a next gen child, niece, nephew, relative who's in the business who may be interested, make sure that you give them the support, right? Coaching, training, some special project opportunities. Ultimately, where I see these challenges come up is when the current executive or business owner is not ready to let go and doesn't trust that that next gen person can really do the job. So I would just caution you all in situations like that. If you're the CEO or the business owner and is holding on because you don't think that other person can do it, let's be very specific about what you expect that other person to do, what those management responsibilities are, and transfer them one at a time and give them an opportunity to step up. Situations that we would love to look like this, situations like this, I've had colleagues joke with me before about, being as that facilitator, because otherwise you end up in horrible dynamics and probably not want our family businesses to run. So I hope a little bit of levity brings light to what is also a very serious topic. I hope some of you are at least Godfather fans out there, and this is helpful. Let's turn this now to your questions. And Brant, I know we had a lot of great questions come in.
Absolutely. Gosh. Well, I'm certainly a big Godfather fan. Thank you for that. And Jeremy, if you want to take down or take over your video, we can get a chance to chat. Can everybody hear me okay? Jeremy, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
All right. Well, we do have a lot of questions. I'm going to some of the ones that came in during this session, and we'll also go over the ones that took place while we were planning for the webinar. The first is from John, and I think you started to address it, but I want to make sure that we've got it all there. His question was, in a smaller founder-led company, how do you get a successor on track to lead the company without over-committing to them? Equity ownership models that you've seen work at this scale of business.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did start to get into it a little bit, John, so hopefully the fundamentals we went through are helpful. More specifically, though, about not over-committing. So I would start with, what are those functional responsibilities that you do as the CEO that you want to transfer to Joe, I will say, and let's set a timeline over the span of a year. Could be 18 months. In the first 3 months, we're focusing on finance. Next 3 months, 4 to 6, we're focusing on sales and customer service. Next 3 months, 7 to 9, we're talking about operations. And your businesses are all very unique, so operations means different things to each of you. But if we start there, and we say that we have the intention over this 18-month span of transitioning to Joe, that's one way to step into it. The other piece of that, you're talking about equity. And so I'm going to distinguish the leadership of the business, or just sort of management responsibilities, from the ownership of the business. There are a lot of strategies around that ownership transfer. You could offer stock options to your entire employee base, but still have Joe be the CEO, right? And get into an ESOP situation. In your situation, you may be talking about, how do I give Joe some incentive without out overcommitting? Well, if you have an annual bonus structure, he could get 1% or 5% of the business for the next 3 years until he becomes, you know, reasonable minority owner. And at that time, if you're ready to transition out, you go get an SBA loan, you go to a bank to get some equity lending. Potentially, like I went to the aerial applicators I was talking about before, they would buy one plane at a time. And they would do that through a bonus structure at the end of the year. If somebody were getting a $50,000 bonus, instead, they would basically transfer $50,000 of equity towards the ownership of one plane. And it may take 5 to 10 years in that type of an asset-rich company. But I would offer that those are some of the small stepping stones that you want to consider to transfer slowly over time without committing. You're maintaining majority ownership. Ultimately, your vote is going to matter most if something were to happen. But if you put in those succession planning milestones, the checkpoints that I alluded to in the roadmap, every 3 to 6 months you check in, you ask, how's it going? At some point, you may pull back and realize it's not the right path. But hopefully, that does keep you on track.
Stephen asks, do you see millennials pushing out baby boomers at all?
As I said before, I'm not a big fan of the commentary, hey, Joe, you look like you're getting old. It's time for you to quit. I've never seen that approach work well, millennials or Gen Xers. But I will say, I do see millennials shifting organizational culture, whether it's bringing work home with them and they're watching TV on their Hulu, right? They're not paying for a real subscription, on their iPad while still doing some emails and doing a little bit of documentation work. So I think millennials are shifting culture, not necessarily pushing out boomers. But I think what that does in response is a lot of boomers are looking at that and saying, this really isn't my company anymore in the way that I grew it, or what's going to take us to the next level is not my more traditional way of doing things the last 20 years, but instead what the millennials are doing or my Gen Xers doing. So I need to get out of the way. So I wouldn't call it a push, but I would say that definitely taking actions or behaviors are having some boomers lean out rather than lean back in.
Good, makes sense. We have Rainier. I'm going to address them both here. In a pre-survey, he asked, what is the means by which the succession plan is documented? Great question. And then during the sessions, he's asked also, what are the top mistakes that you've seen in succession plans and that you see occur often?
Yeah, okay, good questions, and I'll try to get both of those. So from a documentation perspective, let's be clear, I have a PhD in organizational psychology. I got out of my JD, so I'm not going to respond as an attorney much. There are clearly a lot of things you could document in an employment agreement, in a job description that have sort of more legal binding to it about what your successor is intended to do, what some performance metrics are, and potential implications if he or she doesn't get there. So from my side as a coach and a business advisor, we document our coaching plan. I might be helping my successor develop better decision-making skills or help him or her hold the team accountable. That's one form of document we'd have. That transfer of responsibilities I talked about, I will literally build out spreadsheets of every functional job I do as a CEO or as a VP of finance, and then put to a timeline, typically monthly or quarterly, of how we transfer that. That roadmap that you all saw is the highest level view of a succession plan document. Typically, I'd have steps underneath there that talk about the interim promotions or the customer satisfaction review or other things that may go on within that. So I'd say there are a few different documents. And again, you may want to get your attorneys involved to document this more formally outside of what you're doing internally and sort of less formally, if you will.
And then his other question was about the top mistakes that you see being made.
Thank you. So I shared some best practices. I'll say the top mistakes. I wrote an article about this once. You know, it's a very emotional, very personal journey for business owners, especially who have started something, talk about raising their child, watching, their child's develop and mature over time. These companies literally are living, breathing organizations. And one of the biggest challenges is for everybody else to sit back and say, well, Jeremy's company, he'll let us know when he's ready. And unfortunately, the longer we wait, the more health risk comes forward, the more life events happen where we just don't organize in that slow and steady process. It's not a smooth transition. It ends up being a very abrupt and choppy experience. The other piece of that, I'll say as the owner, looking at my workforce and saying, well, they're not talking about wanting to step up, so I guess I have to stick in this. I can't leave yet because my successors aren't coming forward. And again, that's another common mistake of not wanting to engage in the conversation. A lot of people being conflict avoidant. Have the conversation. Make it a very simple conversation. Hey, Brant, I'm thinking about my transition over the next 5 years. You're one of those leaders I look to run this company. Are you interested? Can we talk about it? And Brant says yes, or he says no, but now I know what to do with my succession plan. Brant says no, and there's nobody else in my company, then I'm looking to an external search. I'm looking to an interim CEO potentially for several years. So it's about not engaging soon enough is one of the biggest mistakes. The other one I alluded to before, that dual leadership. I'm the boss. People are used to paying attention to me for 20 years. Brant is my successor. He's trying to take charge, but I keep stepping on his toes. So it's really important to coach that leader in transition to help him or her be a great advocate and supporter, not the active decision maker, not the active leader that he or she has been in the past. I'm a big believer in presidential or CEO veto power, but it needs to be used very sparingly. So as long as you have those two people working together, the leader in transition, the successor, you can avoid a lot of these mistakes that people fall into as natural traps.
Well, that's a good transition to our next question. Jeff is joining us from New York. He's a CEO and president, not yet 40, and certainly not transitioning anytime soon. So he asks, he wants to have a plan for what happens, and how do you talk about people internally about being a potential successor in the event of a catastrophe without giving them the sense that they're necessary to take the reins anytime soon?
So let's go back to the 9-box model, Jeff, and it's a great question. I would hope any company, I don't care if you are GE or Disney, is one of the biggest here in LA to work with, or if you are an unknown entity of $5 million business with 12 employees. I would hope that all of us are looking for which leadership positions are most important to our company's future, and then which people are most likely to be able to perform those roles should anything happen. And I gave up on using the hit by a bus metaphor many years ago. And it's not imagery that I choose to use. Instead, I would talk about what if somebody were to win the lottery and move to Fiji. So if your key people were to win the lottery and move to Fiji, who else is behind them? And so call it a catastrophic event planning document, not a business succession planning document if you want to. In different management consulting language, I call it business continuity, right? So whatever the business is, I would hope that you're looking at all aspects. Just like you have a backup plan for your IT if your servers go down, I want you to have a backup plan for your senior executives should something happen to them or should they choose to move on. And so let's identify 1 or 2 candidates for each of those key roles. Let's offer them some development and coaching. We don't have to name them the CEO successor. At this point, we can just say, we see Brant's a great rising star. We want to invest in his future. We want to give him all the opportunities to really step up in this organization.
Great, Jeremy. That's terrific. I wish that my former corporate believed in me as much as you do. Specifically, which is a good follow-on to your last comment, major firms like General Electric develop several potential successors rather than putting all their cards on a single person, right? We know that. We've seen GE do that, and then guys leave to go run big companies like Home Depot or elsewhere. Especially the person you're developing may ultimately lack the most critical capabilities or might leave before his time. So do you promote multiple candidates for succession for the CEO?
I absolutely do. And so that one situation where I had the leader after 30 years said he's going to retire in 3 months, and that wasn't exactly what he meant, but his language initially We had 3 successor candidates. We put them all through some personality profiling. We had them all interview with the board. We gave them sort of 3 months of coaching, namely me as a coach. And then we had a vetting process on the other side to decide who was the best fit. And yes, I think it's great to have multiple successor candidates internally. What you might find out is that if we have 3 people we're looking at for the CEO role, one of them is going to outshine the others after 6 months of coaching and training. One of them is going to be the best chief revenue officer we've ever had, but we never really thought that we needed to fill that role. But unfortunately, our CRO just got poached by someone phenomenal like Branch, who finds good talent, to go take on a new job. So you never know what's going to happen. And I would offer you definitely want to look at multiple candidates for multiple roles, not just one candidate for one role. Again, I'm talking about start early and create more options than you might feel you need, because life events happen. And I won't even talk about the bus metaphor at this point. There are a lot of mid 40 to mid 50-year-old professionals hitting the peak of their careers right now. And, we're getting into a situation where they're needing to go care for their parents who are, seniors who are aging. And somebody may move from the beaches in Los Angeles to the middle of Michigan to care for their elders. Or you have all kinds of different situations where people might leave unexpectedly. And it's better to have more folks involved in this process than not. One last comment before we go to the next question, Brent. I would just again offer millennials, especially Gen Xers as well, they're not going to hang out forever. They're not going to stick around for 5-10 years waiting to see what's going to happen. So it's important to create that career path and give them a sense of where you're going the next 3, 5, 10 years. Otherwise, if you don't invest in them now, they're going to leave. And again, you lose those options pretty quickly.
Very, very good. When they always leave and move on to other companies, and they leave amicably, of course, you've got an opportunity to generate relationships with potential new customers. So,
sure.
A CEO shouldn't feel that he necessarily is losing someone. He may gain someone into a new environment or a new vertical. We're going to go to some of the questions. I know we've got a couple more coming in, but we've got about 4 or 5 minutes time, and I want to get to some of the questions that came in earlier. Manish asks, Jeremy, what to do or how do you manage a business decline situation if the sector he or she takes charge?
I saw that question. That's a great one. So typically I get brought in when we've identified a successor or a couple of successor candidates. Jeremy helped coach this person to be more leader-like, to really elevate his or her leadership and potentially take over. You're talking about a situation now where we may have done some of that, but unfortunately, when that leader does take over, the business goes awry for any number of different reasons. Could be market factors, could be that person's leadership. So going back to the earlier question, I think it was John who was asking about how do we do this in a piecemeal, kind of controlled manner rather than throwing all of our eggs in one basket. Excuse me. I'd be very careful about handing over the reins until this person has really demonstrated his or her abilities. That's why I talk about that 18-month roadmap. I call it my insurance plan because that means that the leader in transition is going to be there for all of those firsts that your successor goes through. The first annual audit, the first customer litigation, or at least claim that comes in, the first employee termination. And all 3 of these are first that one of my clients is going through right now. And he's 4th generation leader of his family business. He needs his father around to help advise him on some of that in his board. So if you have something that is happening in your market that leader couldn't predict, I wouldn't immediately fire that leader and then step right back in. There are too many succession engagements I get involved in where somebody helicopters out, helicopters right back in at the first sign of trouble. I would try to provide coaching and mentoring to that leader to look at the major customer loss or potentially a lawsuit or whatever those situations are to make sure we learn from them and can improve upon it moving forward. But ultimately, you need to make the call. If after 6 months or a year of declining business that you think is attributable to that senior executive, you may need to come back in. You may need to do an external search. It's not always a perfect process and things do happen. But again, try to distinguish what is market factor versus what is that individual factor. And if it's individual contribution, let's be swift to address it. If it's market factor, let's look at what else we can do in the business, because it may have been not a sustainable business model, or just, we had too many eggs in a single customer basket. And, those situations do happen.
Great. Terrific, Jeremy. A couple last questions as we're getting close to our hour here.
Yep.
But Mark asks, succession plans for a 51% privately owned family business in which the next generation will not participate. And he mentions an ESOP, an employee stock ownership program, or a possible sale, but also managing family and employee expectations. Do you have any experience in that area?
Yeah, so let's start with family business dynamics are always challenging. I talk about the relational chaos that goes on. So the more we can be open and forthright with all this, and especially if you have a family council, to get those people together talking about the state of the business and the future direction. Again, early is better. Have those open and honest conversations early. If you don't have a family council, if you haven't put together a family constitution, I'm happy to talk with you about some of that, some ways that you can structure it so that everybody is well informed and has a voice. If you're doing all that, and now you're just talking about, well, what do we do if we're not going to have one of our offspring, one of our next generation take over? I would look at who are your professional leaders in the business. Are they capable of running it? You don't have to lose your 51% majority ownership as a family just because you have a professional manager run your company. So there may be some great leaders who can lead, right? Remember, I distinguish leadership from ownership. They can lead, but they will not necessarily own. And maybe you do give them some minority ownership, or you give them some, stock options or what have you. But I would not necessarily be concerned about the family business ownership without family business management, if you have a good manager in place who can execute the operation. That's my first point. But from there, then you get the chaos of, is there a lot of infighting and feuding around, but we need to operate it. It's always been a family owned and operated company. That's a different dynamic. I know we're going to share an offer with you in a bit, but give me a call. Let's chat about that one, because now you're talking about real dicey dynamics beyond just that transfer of management from a family member to a non-family member.
All right, as we wrap up, two last questions. James came back with a follow-up. How do you transition out a CEO who's used to running everything? Do you reduce his responsibilities? Do you reduce his days? How do you get him out of the seat, so to speak?
James, you must have worked with many of my former clients, because I could tell that story over and over again. So here's the thing. I have a client in San Diego, family business. Father started it 40 years ago. He's in his early 70s now. My first meeting with him, he said, Jeremy, I am not leaving my corner office until you put me into a coffin. And I said, great. I'm not here to fire you. I just want to make sure you contribute in a way you want to, and that we help Junior be successful in taking over. And at that point, I want him over. And it's really about, what does that CEO in transition want to do? And let him or her be chairman of the board. Let him or her take over a function, and maybe it's customer relations. I've actually worked with some family businesses where dad, who's in his mid-70s, is literally doing blue-collar work because he just loves the company and loves having something to do. But he's given up president, CEO responsibilities. He's not even a voting member. He's sold his equity to his children, and they run the company. But he's stayed involved because he just doing the work. So there are a lot of different scenarios here. I would start with reducing from 5 days a week full-time to 4 days, or leave at 3 o'clock every afternoon, or do things like that. My father was the worst at retiring. It took him 4 years to retire, which is part of why I was inspired to do this work I do now. So wherever you can have them cut back, find new passions. There's a great book out there called The Third Act. If anyone's interested, give me a call, send me an email. I'm happy to send you a link to it. The third act is all about envisioning what your future is going to be after your profession, which was your second act, your school and education being your first act. So there are ways to ease the transition, but usually it comes back to finding that person's passion and having the successor demonstrate his or her abilities to run the show.
One comment and one last question. Karen would actually like some help with regards to preparing her own successor as CEO. So I'm sure she'll be very interested in the offer we'll get you to talk about in a minute. So Karen, stand by for that. But Bob asked, Bob's calling in, or rather wrote in from the Bay Area. Bob works with a lot of different, a variety of different consulting practices. And his question is, and this is a good one for those of us that work with others, how do you get your clients to understand what succession plan is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I had a call yesterday with an attorney. She's had a longtime client. The business owner is in his 50s, so not really retirement age, but he's just done with his business. He wants to get out, and he's asking her, the attorney, how do I structure an agreement with my potential successor, new job description, and things of that nature. And as we were talking, I realized there's so much more in the transition that he's not thinking about, and she's an attorney wouldn't think about. Staff relations. Are they going to stick around with the successor? How do they feel? Looking at the climate of an organization and just that full process. So I would offer to anybody out there who's a service provider, if you've got a client who trusts you as a trusted advisor, just ask them what they're thinking about. When they come to you with a problem around my IT strategy for the next 3 years or my corporate structure, for 5 years out, just ask them the question, have you thought about your succession and what your transition might be? There may be some other, people dynamics here that you want to consider that I, as an attorney or I, as an accountant, don't really specialize in. But there are people like me, whether you call me directly or others like me around the country, there are people who really do specialize in succession planning from the people side of that leadership transition, not the financial side of the equity or the M&A on the transaction. And Bob, I'm happy to have another phone call, and chat about that further.
That's great. All right. Well, listen, we've just hit our Jeremy, I'll give you a minute to put up your contact information. Jeremy is kind enough to offer anyone who reaches out to him with a free consulting call specifically about succession planning, and he'll get that up in a minute. I'm also displaying our offer. ROI and every one of our Maven webinars offers free assessments. You should see that come up on your panel. We only offer 5 of these per assessment or per webinar. So by all means, click on that and pull that up, and you'll be able to get a contact for 5 free assessments within your organization. One of the best ways to really assess where you are with your succession planning as well as with your own staffing is to take part of this assessment, and we ask that you do so by clicking here on the button below. Jeremy, I'm going to put up your offer here, his contact information and his email. If you want to write that down or take a slideshot of that, we will be sending out this replay to everyone who has participated as well as registered for the webinar. So you'll have this information afterwards. But by all means, please reach out to Jeremy. He's more than happy to provide some consultation to you about what's going on within your organization, and I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Dr. Jeremy Lurey, I want to thank you again. Really appreciate your time. It's been tremendous. There certainly has been a lot of gems shared here today, and I'm sure we'll get some follow-up with regards to others. And again, thank you for all who have attended right up to the end. We appreciate your participation and hope to see you next month in our next webinar. Jeremy?
Thanks so much, Brent. Really appreciate everybody for sticking with us here to the end. Please do feel free to send me a quick email or give me a call if you have further questions. There's only so much you can do in about a 30, 40-minute chat here. So let me know what else support you and your clients moving forward. It's a critical time in organizations, and I'm happy to do whatever else I can to share additional resources with you. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks again, Jeremy, and all the best. And thank you for all who attended. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.